Hey guys, welcome back to Home Built, and this week we're going to move on from the engine and move back to the body of the car and start tidying up some more bits and pieces. Alright guys, welcome back, and those of you watching last week will have seen that I spent a fair bit of time doing the wiring on the car, trying to tidy that up, and also I made some braces for these throttle bodies, and there seem to be quite a few questions about that, but if you missed it, I'll put a link up above so you can catch up, and please think about subscribing. It does help out the channel. Now, there were a lot of comments about these braces, and quite a few people, I don't think, quite understood what was going on here. There were lots of people saying, oh, I shouldn't have hard mounted this. I should have put a rubber isolator in this brace. And that is absolutely not what I wanted to do, because putting a rubber isolator in this means that then the throttle would be able to move and vibrate separately to the engine, and that's what I'm trying to avoid. Basically, I wanted to take all of the stress off of this connection onto this plenum. And you've got to remember, this plenum is locked completely solid with the engine. The whole thing doesn't move. So when the engine vibrates and moves, this throttle is just part of that. So it's actually not moving relative to everything else. That's exactly what I was looking for on this brace. And if I put a rubber isolator in here, that means that this could vibrate a little bit, and then it just transfers the vibration up through this joint onto the plenum itself, which is, yeah, exactly what I was trying to avoid, which is why I made a nice hard solid brace, exactly doing the job that I think it needs to do. Now, there are also a couple of comments, people asking whether I could rotate the throttle so that they could be symmetrical, and you can't. If I flip this, or say flip this throttle around and flip it over to the other side, there's a big base on it. It's sit up high, like they're not symmetrical throttles anyway, so that's just how they sit and work in the engine bay, and that's the way they need to be. So that's looking good. I also, in my sort of days off in between this video and the last one, I just went through and redid the wiring slightly and just made them a little bit more symmetrical. I think it looks a little bit neater than sort of trying to just sort of tuck them away as quickly as possible. Making them as symmetrical as possible sort of seems to be the nicest way of doing it. So I think that's looking much better. So today I think we need to start moving back onto the car and just getting things bolted back onto that. And it's all moving forward in an effort to be able to put this back into the car. All right, well, my little fiddly task for today is to try and fix the door locks in my car. Now, the issue I have, this is a door lock that I actually borrowed from Tim at Zoo Autocraft, who does all these Alfa restorations. And basically, the way the Alfa's doors worked, which was different to pretty much every other car's doors at the time. Most cars would have a door handle, and the door lock was just a little button on the top of the door sill that you could just sort of pull up and down, and that was your lock. The Alfa had a pretty cool method that when it works pretty well, is if you pulled the handle one way, you would open the door, and if you pushed it the other way, it would lock the door. And that is the thing that my car currently won't be able to do. And that's because of this little wire arm here. So this little arm basically is a spring-loaded arm that connects to on a rod to the door handle itself. And the trouble is that I have 3 of these, because I actually have a whole spare door. I have 3 of these mechanisms, and none of mine have that little arm that's supposed to fit in here. So that is something that you can't get them, as far as I know. I can't find them online as a reproduction part, so I have to make them to make it work. so that I can actually have door locks in the car that function. So what I'm going to do is, as I said, I borrowed this one from Tim. I am going to now go through and see if I can replicate this this little wire, and then sort of, it actually has a bracket on the end. So this bracket here, as you can see, this part that moves with the wire, I have to actually make that whole system work. As for the spring, there is a spring in behind here, that round spring there. I have to try and come up with something for that as well, but we'll worry about that later. To start with, let's see if we can make this arm to be something similar to what is here. All right, so I studied exactly how this bracket goes together, and particularly this far end, this little sort of flat sheet metal part. And what I've gone through now is I have made that also. I turned up the knob on the end on the lathe, so that fits into the same, basically it's got these little sort of sheet metal linkages. This goes from this part of the door up to the external handle, so it sort of ties the locks inside and outside together, and that's what I've replicated here. So I've got that little piece of metal. This is slightly thicker than the original Alfa stuff. This is 4mm, this is 4.7, 4.8. It's Imperial, so I'm not sure exactly what that is, 1/4 of an inch or something, I don't know. I don't understand imperial measurements. My brain works in metric. So either way, I've made this up. I've made up the little sheet metal bracket. So now I'm just going to weld the two together, and then I can start sort of getting everything ready so that I can put it in the car. And hopefully, if I can make up my own little bushings, it'll all work the way it's supposed to. Okay, so that actually has all gone together quite well and is actually doing the job it's supposed to. Now, I did make some tiny little 3D printed bushings to go onto here, but I made them to the original specs. So I sort of mangled them when I put them on this rod, which is a bit thicker. So I'm going to have to design up and print some others, because there's too much friction in this. But it all works the way it's supposed to. It's actuating in that little slot there. It's doing the levering things it's supposed to do, and yeah, it seems to be working and doing the job. So I've built one, now just have built another one, exactly the same, but opposite for the other door. And now magically I have the second one done as well, and they're working the way they're supposed to. So that was a little bit of messing around and fabrication to get it to actually do door handle things. These are looking really good. Let's see how they work in the car and if they actually will lock and unlock the door the way they're supposed to. So here you might be able to see a little bit clearer how the locking mechanism works. So all the external lock does is bends this arm down, and it basically stops you from being able to open the handle from the outside. It basically just locks off the handle, and when that opens up, then the handle can open all the way. That is all it does. And obviously putting this arm in ties this whole thing together, and now it is working. But we need to go one step further. And that next step is central locking. And I've fitted these the relatively cheap accessible kits you can get. I've fitted a couple of them in the past, long time ago, and they do the job. Generally, it's simpler because you have the little button lock on the corner here, and you just need to sort of screw this inside the door somewhere and run this rod up next to the existing arm, and it gives you these little bracket things that basically you lock it onto here, lock it next to, like sort of locks it onto the original arm, and it'll just open and close the arm. Very simple. In this case, I need to do something slightly different because of the way this works, but I'm still going to be able to connect it up, I think. I've had a quick look, so let's start fitting this up, and then I'll show you what I've done to make it do the job. All right, so I just screwed in the motor into the body here. It'll sit underneath the door trim nice and neatly, and it's out of the way of where the window frame's going to be. And I just used the full length of the arm and just drilled a hole in the locking mechanism here. So that's the actual lock, and I drilled the hole in there, and it's actually quite simple and quite effective. Let me see if I can actually do this one-handed. Locked. And then, of course, if I switch the cables around, so there you go, it works. And I can open and close the door. So that is the central locking on that side. So I just have to go around and do the same thing on the other side. All right, that was actually quite effective by putting those little kinks and drilling a hole in partway along that arm. It takes this flimsy little arm out of the loop, so it doesn't really matter if the internal door lock dies. The central locking will still work, the key on the outside will still work, so I'm still able to get in and out of the car, and I'm not relying on this flimsy mechanism that I've sort of jigged up, and yeah, I am quite happy with that, and most of the time I'm just going to use the central locking entry and exit anyway. All right, next thing that I need to get onto and put onto the car is my steering rack. Now, I bought this steering rack from a wrecker. It was in a pile of just other Toyota steering racks. It had KE70 written on it somewhere in sort of marker pen. So then I went and fitted it to the car, and it fits in the car. It's all ready to bolt back in. But I went and bought all the rebuild stuff for it, and when it turned up, nothing fit. And I was scratching my head, and then after a fair bit of research, because there's not really any numbers on here, but just looking at the size of the threads on the tie rods and things like that, I worked out that this is not out of a KE70. It's not even out of a Toyota. It's out of a Suzuki Swift. It doesn't really matter, it just matters for the rebuild parts, which I have now ordered, so it's time to sort of give this a bit of a tidy up, get it all nice and replace these tie rods and all the rest of it, and bolt it into the car with as a nice refreshed unit. So let's start doing that. After all that, it seems even the Suzuki tie rods are not the right ones, and this may not actually be a Suzuki Swift steering rack after all. Because these new tie rods I've got have actually got like a male fitting that goes into the rack, whereas this particular rack, they need to be a female fitting. So I don't know what they are. But at the moment, the tie rods that are on here are fine. They work, they'll do the job. So I'll leave them and see if I can do a bit more research and find out what rack this actually is. The bushing seemed to fit, sort of. So we'll see. But I think for now, let's mount it in the car. All right, so I have my steering rack in, which means now I can actually go through and start putting on the rest of the suspension components. Mostly because I've got another delivery from Classic Alfa. I ordered all of the bits that I was missing last time. So now it's time to start just reassembling the front suspension area. Besides springs and shocks, which I have something I'm working on the wings, which we will talk about later. But for now, let's get all the components in there and bolt them up. All right, so everything is bolting together. I've got my new adjustable top arm, which I haven't actually locked in yet. I'm going to have to adjust that to spec. And I've also got, I forgot to order the end of the caster rod ball joints, so I'm going to have to order those. But of course, when going to bolt in the new bump stop, and I realised that the bolt is snapped off in the hole. So that's going to be my next fun challenge. Snap bolts are always fun. So I'm going to drill it out and see if I can get easy out in there, and hopefully that will get it out of the hole. All right, bump stop is on, and yeah, that wasn't too bad. I ended up having to drill out the whole thing. The easy out didn't work, but thankfully, at least I have got it on, and it wasn't too bad. But it just goes to show how one little broken bolt can really throw a spanner in the works and really make a simple job turn into a mammoth task. But it's looking good. The basic structure is on this side, so I think it's now time to go over the other side and do the same again. All right, driver's side is looking reasonable. We've got a bunch of bits on. I managed to get the bump stop onto this side without having to fight with a broken off bolt. So that's a good start. Let's see if we can get the rest of this stuff all bolted on. And I just remembered that the other side, I've actually got these two around the wrong way. This curved section here on this lower control arm is actually supposed to go on this side where I have it. This side's correct. It's not really going to make as much difference for me because I've got the steering rack, but it was an issue when you had the steering box coming through here, and that's what that sort of cleared. Whereas if you have a look at this side, it's probably hard to see in the light there, but this side is sort of square, where this side dips in and it's got this curve. So I'm going to have to flip the other one, but not a big deal. All right, well, that was a lot of fiddling around with random bits and pieces that just seem to take a lot of time. Again, I don't feel like I got that much done, but just tinkering, fighting with broken bolts and other bits and pieces that I was sort of doing around the place, trying to get to some of these things back on the car. It's just the stuff that I'm sure many of you have gone through rebuilding old cars. But that is all the time I've got this week, so I think that means it's time for Fun Facts with Mrs. Jeff.
Hey guys, for the 1990 Formula One season, Ferrari introduced the 641. This was an evolution of its predecessor, the 640, which was designed by John Barnard, who left Ferrari to join Benetton. Former McLaren designer Steve Nichols joined Ferrari and took over as technical director for the 641. The car was powered at first by the Type 036 3.5 litre V12 and then later by the Type 037. It made 680 horsepower, only slightly down on the 690 horsepower used by the Honda V10 by McLaren. It was not as flexible or as good out of the corners though as the Ford, Honda or Renault engines used by the rest of the field. Despite having a heavier engine, it was still among the best handling cars on the grid. 641 was the first Formula One car to use an effective traction control system almost 2 years before Williams released their highly successful version. The system was relatively basic with just some software and a wheel speed sensor, but combined with the semi-automatic gearbox, it was seen as technologically advanced for the time. And we're keeping that. A variable trumpet system was also tested throughout the season, but did not become standard equipment. Ferrari's major coup for that year was signing reigning world champion Alain Prost to partner with Nigel Mansell. Prost won 5 races that year and Mansell won 1, as well as a brilliant race in Adelaide where the young Jeff was in attendance, where he just lost out to Nelson Piquet in his Benetton.
All right, we're getting there. Like I said, it feels like there's not much going on, but there's so many little things that need to be tackled all along the way to sort of get it all together. And getting that central locking done was one thing that was that I hadn't tackled yet. So that is a big step in the right direction. Whether I end up actually using those little wire bracket things to control the door locks from the inside or not, I don't know. It's so difficult getting those really fine things working properly without the correct springs and things like that. And it's just unobtainium. As far as I know, you just can't get them. So, yeah.
Did you say it's unobtainium?
Unobtainium.
Huh?
It's like a mysterious metal called unobtainium.
Alrighty.
Anyway, so it's getting there, coming together. It's getting exciting. But every single thing, like I mentioned before, has to be neat and tidy and cleaned up before it gets bolted on again. So
yes.
Everything takes its time.
Yeah, due diligence.
That's right.
Taking it slowly but cautiously.
Something like that.
Yeah. Okay. Take care, everybody, and we'll see you next time. And don't forget to like, if you haven't, why not? And subscribe. And yeah, if you want to see Jeff Daly, as we save your time, no ads.
Yeah.
Patreon.
All right, guys. See you next week.
Hey guys, for the 1991 Formula season. Hey guys, for the 1990, slightly down on the 690 horsepower produced by the Honda V10 used by McLaren. Yes.
That was right.
The 641 was the first Formula One car to use an effective traction system.